So let's raise the big question. Does India need to strongly call out the US-Israeli aggression? Is quiet diplomacy better than empty rhetoric? Can India stay neutral in this war? Is the US sinking an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean a wake-up call? Joining me now is Ashok Kantha, former Indian ambassador to China, joins me. Brahma, Chellaney, strategic affairs expert. He's been writing on this. Vice Admiral Satish Soni, retired former naval commander, also with us. I want to come to you, Admiral Soni, Vice Admiral Soni first. Let's start with the warship issue. I'll come to Khamenei later. But do you believe that this is an embarrassment to have a diplomatic military exercise being conducted just days ago? The ship is on its way back and then gets targeted by a US submarine torpedo. Or do you believe this is fair game? We are in war, and when you're in war, expect the unexpected.
Well, thank you so much, Rajdeep, for having me on your show. But let's get the fact of the matter straight. 3 Iranian ships participated in the International Fleet Review. In fact, at the anchorage, there was only one of them, the frigate, which eventually was sunk, that is INS Dana. And there were 2 other ships which hung around outside. They departed Visakhapatnam on the 25th of February. 25th of February, they set course down south. Indian Navy, I don't think, was aware. So many ships came, they departed wherever they had to go. So Indian Navy was not aware as to which is the next port of call. But apparently, there was a surveillance which was carried out by the P8I, and they found one of the ships off Colombo on the 28th of Feb. Apparently, the ship had 2 medical casualties to disembark in Colombo. I suspect that from the 25th, when they departed, to the 3rd, when the ship was sunk, these ships were hanging around in the sea lines of communication, either waiting for orders from the Iranian Navy as to what should happen, because it is quite illogical to sail into the war zone when you are not even armed. Or they were probably seeking refuge in one of the ports in Sri Lanka. I cannot say for sure what happened. Now, the Indian Navy got this information on the 4th of March at 9 o'clock that there has been a sinking and rescue efforts are on. Indian Navy diverted INS Tarangani, one ship, and sailed 2 ships from Kochi and had the P8I on task. And there were 4 Sri Lankan ships who were carrying out the rescue. Now, in case of whether this is an embarrassment or not, now Iran and US are at war. Now, when you are at war, there is a legal connotation to this. There are laws of armed conflict. There is international humanitarian law. Ships, naval ships of either side of the belligerents, they are qualified military targets. So to be able to say that whether this was a legitimate action or not is...
Let me cut the chase, sir. Would India, what does it say that the Indian Navy was completely unaware of the presence of US submarines in the area?
Well, no Navy who has deployed their submarines in the Indian Ocean or whichever would divulge its position to anyone else.
But we have often claimed publicly that we have surveillance mechanisms across the region in the Indian Ocean.
We don't have. No.
We have claimed that that this is our area of influence.
It may be our area of influence, but to have an underwater domain awareness of the entire Indian Ocean is virtually impossible. It is not possible for even the US Navy or any other Navy.
Even 40 kilometers away from the Sri Lankan coast.
It may be any time, but it is not possible for any Navy to have complete underwater maritime domain awareness. In fact, what you talk of underwater, even surface domain awareness, it is not possible. So therefore, we have these white shipping agreements, we have satellite tracking systems, we have AIS responders on board ships, and that is to make out that to have as much maritime domain awareness as possible. And that is what we share with our literal neighbors.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay, I take your point. Brahma, Chellaney, do you therefore go along that it's unfair to pin the blame on India? we may have had, at some level, a moral responsibility because they were our guests, but Iran and US are at war with each other. Therefore, the US could well claim, just as Iran is firing missiles at random targets recklessly across the Gulf, they've pinpointed and targeted an Iranian warship. Do you believe that the Indian Navy, therefore, can completely put its hands off and say this is a Sri Lankan, at best, a Sri Lankan Navy issue since they were closer to Sri Lankan waters? Certainly, there is no legal responsibility on India to be held responsible in any way for what happened.
Rajdeep, let's not talk about international law. First, the US has not declared war on Iran, despite conducting these strikes every day, hundreds of strikes every day, and yet the US insists that this is not war. Second, the US under Trump has trashed international law openly. Trump regards American power as legal authority by itself. As far as the laws of war are concerned, the Geneva Conventions, they impose a clear obligation. Once a ship is sinking, the attacking party must, as far as circumstances permit, search for survivors. The US submarine instead departed the area. The least the submarine could have done was to alert the Indian Navy so that the Indian Navy could mount rescue operation. The Indian Navy statement today talks about deploying assets hours after the Iranian frigate sunk in the Indian Ocean. But look at it from the broader Indian context. In the world of Indian diplomacy, the Indian Ocean region is considered India's primary area of influence. It is India's strategic backyard. India describes itself as, quote unquote, net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. The Indian Navy is supposed to be the guardian of the Indian Ocean. Yet, a foreign power...
Here you have the Navy Vice Chief telling us, look, you can't monitor every little... it's not possible to monitor the Indian Ocean like this.
But look at it this way, Rajdeep. A foreign power conducting a high-intensity torpedo strike so close to Indian waters in India's maritime backyard, wouldn't that raise concerns in New Delhi? The fact that Iris Dina had just departed from India's Milan naval exercise in Visakhapatnam highlights a grim irony. A vessel invited by India for a friendship exercise was destroyed by India's major defense partner, the US, shortly after leaving Indian waters without India being informed about it. There was no coordination with India. What does it show? What does it show? That the US has effectively ignored India's role as a regional security provider. And there are larger questions because India has signed all the 4 so-called foundational defense agreements with India, like Limao, Comcasa. And the question today, the one question that we shouldn't ignore is that under these 2 military pacts, Comcasa and Limao, India and the US share sensitive maritime data. If the US attack submarine used shared data to locate and sink this Iranian frigate that had just departed Visakhapatnam, it would represent a foundational breach of the US-India defense partnership. So,
right.
There's a certain message the US is delivering to India, that we don't care about India, about its regional role. We don't care about Prime Minister Modi's vision of Mahasagar, that we will do what we think is appropriate. As the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, that we don't care about laws of war and that we will pursue our war with no mercy.
Right. Okay, those are very strong words coming in from you, Brahma Chellaney, almost suggesting that this strikes at the very heart of the US-India defense partnership. You mentioned Geneva Convention. Geneva Convention 1949, Article 18. After each engagement, parties to the conflict shall without delay take all possible measures to search for and collect the shipwrecked, wounded and sick, to protect them against pillage and ill treatment, to ensure their adequate care and to search for the dead and prevent their being despoiled. The Geneva Convention Article 18 says, whenever circumstances permit, the parties to the conflict shall conclude local arrangements for the removal of the wounded and sick by sea from a besieged or encircled area and for the passage of medical and religious personnel and equipment on their way to that area. So India could claim they've subsequently followed Geneva Convention. But Ashok Kantha, it seems to have within 24 hours, this strike on an Iranian warship almost ensured that India has made a reach out to Iran. There's been a conversation between Dr. Jaishankar and his Iranian counterpart. And Vikram Misri, Foreign Secretary, has gone and signed the condolence book, condoling the killing of Ali Khamenei 5 days after he was assassinated. There were questions over India's silence. Has India finally been forced to speak out because of what happened?
Well, Rajiv, I would not like to see it as a cause and effect kind of situation. What happened in case of Iris Dena is deeply troubling, no doubt about it. It's problematic on many counts, as Professor Brahma Chellaney has also brought out. One, as mentioned, here was a warship which was participating in an Indian, goodwill naval exercise on its way back, clearly in a non-combatant role, and it's being hit like that. There are, apart from legal issues, there are serious, strategic signaling to India that what is happening in our immediate periphery, USA doesn't quite take into account. From legal point of view, also, you referred to Article 18 of Second Geneva Convention, which has clearly been violated by US submarine. At the least, it could have alerted Sri Lankan Navy and Indian Navy, even if it didn't want to surface to help, the stricken Iranian sailors. Equally important from our point of view, it is in violation of Article 58 of UNCLOS. This incident took place within exclusive economic zone of Sri Lanka. And our reading of Article 58 is that no such military activity can be undertaken without due regard being taken of interests of coastal estate, essentially consent being obtained. USA has a different reading, no doubt about it. I'm aware of that. But India, almost entire global south, abides by interpretation I just referred to. That was also violated. But bottom line is that what has been done in a way is a part of pattern of behavior where USA engages in activities in India's neighborhood, whether it be in Pakistan, whether it be in Bangladesh, whether it be in coastal waters, EZ of Sri Lanka
with due regard, where
our concerns.
No, so where does this leave the US-India strategic partnership? Where does this, as is being suggested by Brahma Chellaney, we have this defense partnership, and yet US has completely disregarded in a way the Indian Navy or Indian government concerns, gone ahead, torpedoed an Iranian ship, which was our guest, which was a non-combatant in that sense. And are we saying that we just can throw our hands? Yesterday I had Admiral Prakash on the show, Arun Prakash, former naval chief, and he said India must show its displeasure. Ashok Kantha, can India show its displeasure today to America?
There are different ways of conveying displeasure, whether we do it publicly or we do it privately. But I think our deep concerns in this regard ought to be shared with Washington, D.C., because, this is something which is clearly not acceptable. I would not like to link this incident in its aftermath with position we have taken on, condemning, not rather condemning, but expressing our condolences on assassination of Iranian supreme leader. Which
but it took us 5 days, sir. With due regard, Mr. Kantha, it took us 5 days. It took us 5 days to break our silence.
Yes, which has its own message. And but I don't want to comment on that. There are considerations that my serving colleagues and political leadership of the country has to take into account. As private citizens, we can comment on it. That's a different matter altogether.
Okay. Brahma Chellaney, are you surprised that do you see some kind of correlationship between what happened to the Iranian warship off Sri Lanka's waters and India now signing that condolence book and making it clear that they condole at the passing away of Ali Khamenei. 5 days, there was no such comment being made.
There is a connection, Rajdeep. The Indian government is facing pressure both internally and externally. Let me first describe the external pressure. The US wants India to activate LIMOA, the military pact, to support US naval assets operating in the Indian Ocean. If India allows the US to refuel or repair its ships involved in the strikes against Iran at Indian ports, it would effectively end India's claim of neutrality. If India provides logistics, that is food, water, fuel to the US 5th or 7th Fleet under LIMOA right now, India will be seen as a logistical accessory to the US war effort. And domestically, as the opposition attacks the government on different issues, there is pressure, at least there is political pressure from the opposition to suspend LIMOA while the war rages. But LIMOA and COMCASA are the two main agreements out of the four that are at the heart of the current dilemma that the Indian government faces. Let's look at it. Let's look at it in a larger light. That what this particular episode, that is the sinking of an Iranian frigate, has highlighted, it is that India needs to reduce its reliance on Washington. As Ambassador Ashok Kantha has very rightly pointed out, that in India's immediate neighborhood, whether it's Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, Iran, or the Indian Ocean, the US and India are not on the same page. In fact, the US is working against India's vital interests in India's own neighborhood. So India's reliance on Washington needs to be tempered. That's the message.
Okay. I want to get a final word then from you, Admiral Soni. Do you believe that the Indian Navy, in a sense, also needs to relook at this entire engagement with the United States? If the United States is going to take India and the Indian Navy and our defense partnership for granted, where does it leave us?
You know, India has started its engagement with the US Navy from '92. From then, our dependence on the US arms industry has only slowly been increasing. We, in return, get state-of-the-art equipment, which has helped us a great deal. And now we are into technology transfer partnerships. So there is much to gain from the US, there is no doubt. How this works in the greater geopolitical matrix and political affiliations and dependence thereof is something for the political leadership to decide. But Indian Navy has certainly gained a lot, but I am sure that we are not fools and we calibrate these associations, very critically, and we don't want to become over-dependent. There is a lot of emphasis which is given on indigenization, especially in the Indian Navy. We are building ships which have got up to 88% of indigenous content. So I think we will continue to have engagement with the US Navy, that there is no doubt. Let us not get very passionate about these things. But of course, we have to have
The question is whether we have to draw some lines, now with the United States. And maybe this episode says there are certain red lines that cannot be crossed. And maybe that's the message in a way that needs to be given even to the United States, which is unofficially at war with Iran, but officially has not declared war as yet. I appreciate my guest joining me here on my top talking point. Much for the Indian government and in the Indian Navy to reflect upon.